We're looking at lesson number 4 in your books this morning, page 33. Anybody need a book? We still got several up here. If I got one or two, those are extra, so if you have a neighbor or somebody that you want to give one to, we always seemingly have those. Are you enjoying this lesson? What? Okay. Are you enjoying this lesson, looking at the different cities? I am. It's interesting when you look at these different towns. I think mentioned way back in the introduction that Jesus probably never traveled more than 110 miles from Nazareth, from Bethany, where he was born, and Nazareth is where he grew up. Of course, if that happened today, I guess he'd jump on a plane and go all over the world. But walked, basically. Maybe he walked everywhere. I know it indicates that he rode a donkey into the city on one occasion. But other than that, his disciples walked, so explains, I guess, a little bit as to why he didn't travel very far. The text this morning from John 2, John 4, John 21, and then back to John chapter 1. And what I did in my study is I went through just those texts and took my notes. Then I went back through that again and looked at the some of the applications or some of the things that I kind of missed in my first going over. So, depending on how far we get, I will have, we'll talk about certain things, and I'll go back and talk about some of those again, so that you'll be able to keep up that way with what I'm talking about. If you had a chance to look at your lesson, the first text, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, is Jesus turning the water to wine. And of course, that's the biggest text, and that's the one that there's been the most time on in our study this morning. In chapter 4, beginning with verse 46, this is a second miracle. Jesus was in Cana. He made a trip likely to Jerusalem, I think for Passover, and then he was back at Cana. And a nobleman had a son that was at the point of death. And Jesus healed that son. In chapter 21, it talks about Nathanael, who was of Cana. It's thought that he may have also been called Bartholomew. If you look at that in your quarterly, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's accounts of the apostles, they do not mention Nathanael. They mention Bartholomew. So it's thought that Nathanael was likely one of the 12, but there is also the possibility that he was simply one of the disciples, if that matters anything per se to you. It's thought that he was likely one of the apostles in part because Philip went and got Nathanael. It's interesting, the very same thing is said about Andrew. Andrew went and got Peter and brought Peter to Christ. And Philip also did that as well. He told Nathanael that they found the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, and he's the one that said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Likely one of those statements that you and I might make today because of a place's reputation, per se. Doesn't mean that he didn't believe it, but he was pretty skeptical. It seems that Jesus of Nazareth really was the one that had been prophesied about. But Philip then basically said, "Come and see." I like that. Philip did not try to, per se, convince Nathanael. that Jesus was the Christ, but he evidently knew that if Nathanael would come and see Jesus and talk to him, that he also would be convinced of who he was, and that seems to have been what took place. Anybody with a thought, question, or comment before we look in this first text in John chapter 2?
It's very difficult. I have found out today, I was in the bank one day, and I was talking to these ladies, and one of them over there was not a first-class person, and I was trying to share with them salvation. And I was, of course, every guy in church class early can quote those God's plan of salvation and can quote the scripture. He said, well, she realized it, but she said, well, what about the people?
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at is their willingness to believe. We had the old law of Moses there, and it was hard for them to give that up, even though Christ was prophesied to come.
Right.
Even though I presented them the scriptures, they were so reluctant to believe.
Yeah, I think that, we've talked about that numerous times, I guess, the angle of how challenging it was for the Jewish people to really understand that Jesus was the one that Moses had talked about. He was the one that Isaiah rather, had talked about, Jeremiah had talked about, that was mentioned in the Psalms. And I guess it just shows that sometimes we know it and we read it, but we've really not accepted it, the implications of it sometimes. And I think that as Jesus, was in this 3-year ministry, which is beginning basically now with John chapter 2, a lot of folks knew the Old Testament well, but still struggled with that. And we see that throughout the New Testament, particularly in the book of Acts. And again, one of the things, back to the other issue that you brought up, I like this idea, just come and see, just come and listen. And sometimes, with somebody that is not a Christian, that may be the best answer. There are answers for the thief on the cross. There are answers for this particular section of what kind of wine did Jesus create in this miracle. But it's hard sometimes, I think. Okay, let's dig into this one. This particular miracle, John chapter 2, and I hope you've read it there on page 33. It won't take time to go through it all, but we'll talk about it as we go here. But it sheds some light on the social aspects of Jesus' life. We focus so much on the teachings that he did and the changes that were being made here. But maybe we miss a little bit that he was involved in everyday activities. He truly was a man. He was God, but he was all man as well. And on this particular occasion, there was a gathering for a wedding or a wedding feast. And we know that Jesus went and Jesus participated in them. His presence here, obviously he had received an invitation to come, and he was involved in bringing happiness to these people. So not everything that he did, had, a scripture behind it. But he was involved here in not only participating in a fun activity, but it was something that he was involved in, and in performing this miracle, he was involved in making the party better and giving joy. Also, because this was talking about marriage, Christ sanctioned marriage, and he attended to things that pertained to marriages. He sanctioned friendship and the social aspect of the church. And he left up a good example for us. I think that one of the things that you see here is that, Jesus participated in things outside of the building. And it was something that he approved of. I think you also could make the argument that in sanctioning this marriage, he was also sanctioning the home and the things that apply and the importance of marriage and the home. If marriages today would invite Jesus, think what a difference that would be. This couple, and they're unnamed, don't know who they were, he or she, neither one are named, but Jesus and his disciples were invited. If we could impress folks with the importance of considering Jesus, considering a life in Christ, and take that into the marriage, then there would be a lot better marriages, and there would be more permanence in it. Anybody with a thought there?
On there in verse 4,
Yes, sir?
I've often wondered, and I don't know whether there is an answer to this or not, Steve, and I'm certainly not trying to put you on the spot. But she said there, when she told him the problem,
Yes.
he said, not to, he's concerned with that because it's not his time.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he said that a number of times throughout his ministry, and he said that a few times when they were trying to arrest him and that type of thing. And as a rule, it applies to the idea that it was not time for the crucifixion, but that's the reason that he came, to live and to die. Here, it seems to have been a little bit of a mild rebuke to his mother. And he was basically saying, you're getting ahead of me. That type of idea. But when he said it's not my time, as a rule it applied to why he came. To live, to be crucified, and to be resurrected the third day. And if you got a concordance, you look that up, that wording, you'll find that a number of times there in reference to that. And while we're at that, and jump on down here somewhere, he referred to her as woman. It almost sounds maybe disrespectful, but that was a very common use of that expression in that day. So he wasn't being disrespectful to his mother. He does seem to be saying, I'm not ready yet. But as far as we know, that this is the first miracle that he performed here in Canaan. And then the nobleman's son being raised, or being cured, being at the point of death there, may have been the second as well. But yeah, that has reference to that. As you look at this particular story, one of the things in knowing the culture, it was a very embarrassing thing to run out of wine. This may have been a poor family, but when I was reading that and it was talking about the culture and the importance, I think that Libby would do real well back then, because anytime we have anybody over, you'd think she was cooking for 1,000 people. And maybe your wives or you are that way too. I was scared to death she's going to run out. And I ate leftovers for a week. She goes so overboard, afraid she's going to run out. Well, you see this idea here.
But ain't that also an archetype of the wedding between the people when you marry Christ and the 1,000-year reign of Christ?
Well, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I don't think so. I think I think it is more just to do with a regular, everyday wedding in this particular case. Pat?
Many people today will use this miracle to justify the social drinking of alcohol.
Right.
Is it not true that under Jewish culture they were not allowed to touch alcohol or to consume it?
Now that I don't know.
I've heard that somewhere in the law of Moses or something back in the Old Testament that, Jesus kept the law perfectly, and if this was alcoholic wine, then he would violate something of the customs or traditions of the Jewish law.
Well, part of what you said there is true. I don't know if it was because of the fermenting aspect of it. They were not to touch a dead body. They were, all sorts of things. And it could have been. I don't remember seeing that in what I was studying, but it might be something you might want to go back and look at. Anybody else come across that idea?
No, and like what you pointed out there, she came to him and said, they have no mind.
Right.
It was really important. And for us to assume that this was grape juice or non-fermented or wine, we can't do that.
Right.
Because we don't know.
Well,
And that
Yeah.
question, Mary, it's a good question, it's a good thought. But when you start assuming things, and he said the Jewish law, he didn't say the law of Moses. And that, if he broke the Jewish law, that's not against God's law. But I personally think that Jesus, at this wedding, if he wanted to, he could have drank wine. And it's Jesus Christ, our Savior. And then the Bible goes on, he was sinless. And I see you twist your mouth. I don't mean to imply anything, it's just my thoughts.
twist my mouth because my lips are dry.
I don't want to jump ahead of you or something.
Okay, well, let's back up. Okay, let me talk a few minutes, and we'll go through all of that per se. This was in Canaan, which was involved in an allotment that was given to the tribe of Asher. You can go back to chapter 19 in the book of Joshua. There were two Canaans. One was southern towards Samaria. This one is up in Galilee. If you're looking at your map, look just to the left of the Sea of Galilee. That's where this particular little town was. Now, it is thought in many religious circles that Jesus made intoxicating wine when he performed this particular miracle. And it should be noted that he did turn water to wine. Now, how do you know whether or not that was intoxicating or not? Well, the context. The word is unos, which is the Greek word, and I can't really say the Hebrew, well, I can't say the Greek very well, but I can't say the Hebrew word either. But, the idea was that you have to look at the context. There was a process of nature that eventually that fermenting process would take place. And the word unos is used for that which is intoxicating and that which is not. But what we have to do is look again at the context. And the verdict here of the ruler of the feast, they would select a governor, a ruler, a steward over these marriage situations. And they were kind of in charge of everything. And when this particular person tasted this, he pronounced that it was good wine. Evidently, the flavor was very good. Now, there's an indication of whether or not it was intoxicating or not. When you tasted it, the flavor would be obvious. Whether it was intoxicating or not would not. So when this governor, this steward, first tasted of it, he said it was good. So that's an indicator that it was simply grape juice. When Jesus turned the water to wine, he bypassed the natural process, which would have taken time to make it, have an alcoholic content. Both the Roman and Greek writers, including Aristotle, Athenaeus, Pliny, they all attest to the fact that fermented grape juice did exist back there. So they did have it. In verse 10, Also, it uses the expression that the guests were, they had drunk freely, or they were filled, or they were satisfied, or they had well drunk, depending on your translation. It doesn't mean that they were intoxicated at all. There's all sorts of expressions there. So there's nothing in the passage that would indicate that the Son of God sanctioned in any respect the consumption of intoxicating wine as a beverage. So if it is affirmed that drunkenness is wrong, or drunkenness to excess, and we know that is a fact, and if you took this idea of getting drunk well or being filled to mean that they were intoxicated, you have Jesus sanctioning something that is sinful and contributing to it. If well drunk means that they were intoxicated, obviously that is referred to in the Bible as a sin, and Jesus made it worse. I hope that we can see that's not what he did. We have a lot of passages, Hebrews 4:15, 1 Peter 2, that Jesus was without sin. So Jesus did not sin, and he did not contribute to drunkenness or something that was sinful. If he did, this would have been the only time that Jesus ever did anything with his godly powers to attribute or to contribute to something that is hurtful to man. He just didn't do that. Yes.
In a nutshell, there is more evidence that this was non-alcohol wine
Yes.
than there is evidence that it was alcohol. If you look at it objectively, and you, like you say, put it in context, use that hermeneutic that you just used with God would, or Jesus would never create or contribute something that was later or before
Right.
categorized as being something you should not do.
Right.
That's a very good argument. I always say that if Jesus turned water wine, I said, you made it alcohol. Jesus didn't make it alcohol. You did. Because oinos is the juice of a fruit of a berry. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's hundreds of times it's used in Scripture. And 3 or 4% of that time is alcohol. The other places is just grape juice.
Right.
You made it alcohol. Jesus didn't make it alcohol. You did.
Yeah.
Because you see that word, it's translated in English as wine, and you instantly think of, like you and Lee have that you never run out of when people come over, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And
I'm kidding about that. That's not what you talk about food.
yeah, I was. But
You can't say just because it says oinos
right.
that it's alcohol.
Right.
And Jesus would never contribute.
To something that's sinful or wrong.
And
What you saying, Cody?
I'm sorry, just one more thing.
Uh-huh.
Did it taste different?
It tastes better.
Did it taste different though? From what was first being consumed, which is implied alcohol.
Let's take, go back just a second. I don't want to get into, but I know we've all thought about this, and I don't think it's really that important, but it's a fun thing to talk about. Like you mentioned before, the master of the guy that was in charge there, he knew whether it was fermented or not. Now you said, I'm not going to contradict you in any way. All I'm saying is I'm going back on his knowledge, and they had picked him for a reason. He was knowledgeable, and this was truly a miracle. And those people there, including him, had to be,
Well,
It just doesn't really matter.
well, that is correct. He knew, but did his knowing suggest one way or the other? And basically it didn't. It had a better taste. You know, when I was thinking about this, I've got a friend, and he was younger in life. He was a pretty big beer drinker, and there was a group of guys, and they would drink, and he told me, he said, we buy the good stuff. Now, I don't know which beer is better than the other, but he said after we drank a couple of six-packs, it didn't matter what it was. It could be the cheapest beer that you could buy. You know, that same thing, because they could not, you know, tell the difference. Now, back to this other idea, among the Orientals and also the Romans of that day, they would drink grape juice. It was very common. They would mix it with water, and they would have it both hot and cold, and often put spices in it. So again, you know, both were common. But the superior wine of that day was the sweetest and had the nicest flavor, and was not intoxicating at all. It's also important to notice, and as you continue to read there, get on down verse 11, that the object of the miracle, the declared object of the miracle, was to manifest the glory of Jesus. It was not just for the pleasure of the guest, although that was accomplished. We know that Jesus, you know, went about doing good, and that was the point. But what this miracle did is it demonstrated his identity with God and as God. And obviously, if it contributed to drunkenness, it would not have done that. Jesus did something that was miraculous. Now, as Charlie's talking there about the governor or the steward, whichever it was, he recognized that this was a better taste. And that's really all that it was. And we just have to, I think, recognize that. Now,
Steve, before you go farther,
yes.
it was not uncommon to use the same grapes for multiple squeezing. So if you've already been through a lot of the drink, and you go back and squeeze them one more time, it's going to be more watered down. And you wouldn't just go find more grapes and start from scratch. So it would naturally be that Jesus did this miracle. He's not going back and squeezing the same grapes all over again. So it would naturally have a better taste. It would be like the first time you went through and produced it.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good point. And different grapes have a different taste too, you know. Yes.
You know, I had a mental battle going on for many years on this subject with the taking of the fruit of the vine and the Lord's Supper. How did they preserve, 2,000 years ago, the grape juice to partake of the fruit of the vine year-round? It turns out that if you dehydrate grape juice, it will not ferment. So you can actually cook it down to a solid state and reconstitute it to have non-alcoholic drink.
Like you add water back to it.
Add water, yeah, reconstitution.
Yeah.
So therefore, it makes sense that the grape juice or the wine that was used in this being lesser quality at the start was rehydrated, and all of a sudden you have fresh.
Right. Yeah, and it is a good point. And, you know, again, if we want to do something, we'll come up with something to either excuse it or to authorize us to. I think that's where social drinking comes in, you know, without, you know, really digging into it and studying it carefully. Another point here, they had these water pots. They were used probably for the ceremonial washing. This was something the Jews did. They would constantly be washing their hands or their arms and that type of thing. But they had these jars or these water pots. And each pot would hold 2 to 3 firkins, as it was called, which by measure would be about 9 gallons for each of those. So if you add that up, 6 pots that hold between 18 and 27 gallons. So you had either 108 gallons up to 162 gallons. Now that's a lot of water, and that's a lot of grape juice. And as we noted earlier, these feasts, it was not unusual for them to last as much as 7 days. It wasn't like where we have a wedding and then have a reception and, an hour or two, it's over with. But this was a lot. And as was mentioned, the servants knew they put water in those pots. The governor did not. So when he tasted of it, that is an indicator that, definitely this was not still water. If the idea of well drunk applied to everybody there, including the governor, it's interesting. He still had the ability to determine between the superior wine and that which was inferior. Let's see what else I got here. Oh, in Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 8, the prophet speaks of new wine that is found in the cluster. So, again, the word unos was used, as Tom was pointing out, a limited number of times to that which was intoxicating. Most of the time, it was simply the grape juice. Jesus, in Matthew 21 and verse 33, telling a parable, he talks about the wine press. And that's what it was called. It was like a vat. You may have even seen on television, they get in there with their bare feet and press out. I think I Love Lucy, I think one of those crazy shows one time. And they got that all over them and they're making, but that, the point is, Jesus called it a wine press. Obviously it was grape juice, because they just picked it off the vine, put it in the vat, and now they're squeezing it out. So that was not uncommon at all. It takes a stage to make it ferment. A Jewish rabbi made this statement. He said, in the Holy Land, they do not commonly use fermented wines. The best wines are those that are preserved and unfermented. Now, in Proverbs 23, verses 30 through 32, I think I left that mark. Yes, Proverbs 23:30 says, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent, and it stings like a viper. That's just one passage that talks about the danger of an alcoholic beverage. And when we come back to this, the ruler of this feast simply states a usual practice of serving the best wine after people are filled, and then bringing on that wine which is not as good, as Rick pointed out, maybe watered down more. He doesn't say that the crowd was drunk. They had filled, they had their fill of it. And Jesus definitely would not present an alcoholic wine to people that were already drunk to make them even drunker. And the reason for the miracle was to manifest his glory. So the evidence is overwhelming that Jesus made grape juice rather than something that is intoxicating. Last night, and looking this up, in 42% of fatal car accidents on New Year's Eve is alcohol. 42% of people that get killed on New Year's Eve each year has to do with alcohol. 37 people die every day because of, and this was particularly in 2023, every day it had to do with alcohol. 13,000 people die a year. This was last year. Because of alcohol. So the evidence is just, overwhelming of the dangers of it. Social drinking is so destructive because it eventually leads to becoming an alcoholic in the lives of a lot of people. Not everybody. There are those that can drink a beer, they don't want to. But there are those that drink one beer and they want a six-pack, and so forth and so on. And the Bible is very strong in disproving of that process. And if we were to say that Jesus contributed to it, I don't know how you can say that without saying he sinned. And he did not sin. Now, somebody that didn't have that chance to say something.
Well, really is, we're talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. When you talk to his mother the way he did, she probably didn't, like, we don't understand everything in the scripture. She probably didn't understand Jesus either, and all the things he did. But, like she told the servants, you just do like he said, and then everything will be all right. So, we know Jesus didn't sin, and like you said there before, you've been around a few people, got a few beers too many.
Yeah.
They don't care what they're drinking.
No, I think that point.
Understand it either.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and the next verses were, nobleman whose son was sick and permanent. He would run to Jesus and get out everybody drunk and ask him if he was sick. So, we look like this, we got the Lord Jesus talking here. And things, but he talked about being drunk, not sick.
That particular passage is at a different time, but you're exactly right. Jesus' mother, you don't know whether she either knew the family or something, because she kind of takes charge, but, she felt that her oldest son could take care of it, I guess. How he would do that, I don't know. But that statement to the servant to do what he says, that's pretty good advice for all of us, to listen to Jesus and to follow his instructions. And so that's sort of, anybody with something final.
I heard that it was one of Mary's, might have been one of Mary's cousins.
It could have been there's a pretty good argument that it was a relative, because again she kind of stepped in there, so it may have been a close relative of Mary, considering she had something to do with it. Appreciate it.